the second video for Wednesday, July the 8th. We're going to have a test next Monday. I'm going to try and get you your review sheet by Thursday night. I got everybody's lab sitting over there on the table. I'm going to grade it. I'm going to photograph it. That'll help you a little bit in getting ready for the next test as well, because some of the lab material will also be on the test. But we were talking about mass wasting, chapter number 10. Now, back when Darlene Anthony and I, she's the other geology professor, picked this online textbook, we realized that chapter 10 was not really well written. So I'm just going to, it skips a lot of important things. It doesn't show you important pictures and really help you understand it. So I'm going to do this myself. You might not want to use your textbook too much for chapter number 10. Some of the stuff is relevant. It's still worth going over maybe. But basically what mass wasting is the downward movement of Earth materials due to the influence of gravity. And it has to do with real estate values, as I mentioned before. When you build a house or a building, you want the ground to be stable. If it moves, you're going to have problems with the foundation of the building or the house. You're going to have cracks in your basement or your crawl space, broken sewer pipes, broken natural gas lines. It's going to cost you a lot of money. So, obviously, what can lead to mass wasting is an over-steepened slope. The steeper the slope is, the more likely it is to move. And that's just common sense. But it's also dependent on the geology. We talked about how the dip of the beds affects the chances of mass wasting occurring. Also, it's dependent on how well vegetated the slope is. If there's more vegetation, there's less likelihood for mass wasting occurring. Assuming the plants have deep roots, they're going to hold the soil in. When you lubricate a slope, when you add water to a slope, you weaken it. So anything that takes water out of the slope is going to be to your advantage. It's going to lower your chances of mass wasting. What kind of things can we do to remove water from a slope? Well, one of the most obvious is to drill a well, a water well. And if you live in a rural area, it might behoove you to drill a well to satisfy your family's water supply needs. The company is going to come in and test the water and make sure it's clean. It meets Safe Drinking Water Act standards, and it tastes good, and there's a plentiful supply of it. Well, think about it. If you sink a well down into your property, and your property is on a slope, you're killing two birds with the same stone. You're not only are you supplying with your family with clean, fresh water, so you don't have to pay a water bill every month, but on top of that, you are stabilizing your slope so that you have less mass wasting problems. Leaking septic tanks can add water to a slope. Leaking swimming pools can add water to a slope. Anything that adds water to a slope is going to cause it to move more easily. And then you're going to have problems. There are 7 kinds of mass wasting: rock falls, avalanches, rock slides, earth flows, mud flows, creep, and solifluction. Write that down on a piece of paper if you would. And know what each one looks like and where each one occurs. So we're going to go over this list here: rock falls, avalanches, rock slides, earth flows, mud flows, creep, and solifluction. Let's go over them one at a time. I'm not just teaching this stuff out of a book. I've done consulting work in mass wasting, so I think I might be able to share some interesting information for you as a future homeowner, or if you own a house now, how to protect the value of your real estate. Let's take a look at a rock fall first. Rock falls occur in mountainous terrain, like in Morgan County or, Scott County, where you have steep terrain. Every year, if you pay attention to the news, you hear about rock falls falling onto the interstate, and sometimes people get killed. If you're driving down a road and it's raining and you have a rock fall, it could kill you no matter how big your vehicle is. And so a rock fall is when the rocks it occurs a mountainous terrain when the rocks just fall straight down. Here's a rock fall. Let me show you a diagram of a rock fall. Rock falls are occurring in very steep terrain where rocks just fall straight down. And the material that falls straight down onto the bottom here can fall onto roads. And that brings us to the topic of road building. When you build a road, you steepen the slopes on both sides, right? So road building is one of the main causes of rock falls. Rock falls are the fastest type of mass wasting. They can reach very high speeds, those rocks, depending on how far down they fall. So why is it, think about it, why is it that every time they want to extend the interstate, they there's opposition from the homeowners? Do you remember when Hardin Valley, they wanted to extend the interstate through Hardin Valley? All the Hardin Valley homeowners got together and opposed it. Why? Well, if you steepen the slopes, if you have a highway coming near your house, you're going to have steep slopes. You're going to destabilize the slopes. That means you're going to have a higher chance of mass wasting. That means you might have a cracked driveway. You might have a cracked building foundation. Your insurance rates are going to go up. That's why homeowners gather together to try and stop TDOT from building roads near the house. Also, it brings noise and crime into an area. If you're someone, a man, a husband and wife, and you spent your whole life building equity in your house, and you have $200,000 of equity in your nice house, the last thing you want is for TDOT to come in and steepen the slope near your house, and all of a sudden your property is worth $110,000. Plus, you have more insurance costs and more problems with your house. So it's not easy for TDOT. Whenever there's opposition, whenever they build a road, so they have to have a slush fund available to pay off these homeowners, because we do need to extend roads sometimes. We do need to build new roads. Road building is one of the most common causes of an oversteepened slope. Another thing that can cause slopes to be too steep, oversteepened, you might not be as aware of this, is sea cliff erosion. If you live near a coastline, let's say anywhere from Massachusetts to California, you have the ocean waves are going to crash into the sea cliffs. Let's take a look and see what happens. We have a whole chapter later on coastlines, but the sea cliffs they're really tall. I wish this would hurry up and load because it's easier to show it to you in the. Let's see here. Okay, look at this sea cliff here, and here's the beach. But when you get a storm, the waves are going to crash into these sea cliffs, and they're making them steeper and steeper. Then you're going to have mass wasting, and you can see that these houses here are already in a precarious state. If this sea cliff retreats even further, some of these buildings are going to collapse, aren't they? And so people along the coastline have to deal with oversteepened slopes from wave erosion, from the waves crashing into sea cliffs. How can you protect yourself then if you are a coastal landowner? People love to live near the beach. you can see the attraction. I have a friend, his name is Craig Magnuson, and his wife, and they live near Redondo Beach in California. They every day they could just take the stairs down to the beach and walk the dog or walk with their kids up and down the beach. It's beautiful. It's like paradise. People are attracted to the ocean, but you have to deal with um, the sea cliff erosion, this mass wasting. There's rock falls that occur down from the sea cliffs. So, how do you protect your property? You need a wide beach. Why? Because the wider the beach is your only protection from the waves. If your beach here extended a couple hundred yards further out to sea, then the waves wouldn't hit the cliffs, would they? So you need to have enough sand on these beaches. Beach sand has been it mostly comes from rivers, and we've dammed most of the rivers, so almost all of the beaches are shrinking. So the only way around it is you have to buy sand. It's called beach nourishment. And every year you have dump trucks come out and dump the sand in front of the cliffs so that you have a wider beach to protect your cliffs from being oversteepened. Bottom line is road building and sea cliff erosion are two of the main ways you have oversteepened oversteepened slopes, or rivers cutting into riverbanks can also cause oversteepened slopes. So when you live on a slope, you need to find out ways to stabilize the slope, and we'll talk about how to do that. Or you need to widen your beach if you're living along the coastline. So we talked about rock falls. There's an avalanche is actually a type of rock fall, but it's the fastest type of mass wasting. And with an avalanche, huge amounts of snow or rock move down for thousands of feet, and they reach very fast speeds, hundreds of miles an hour. That's called an avalanche. Why is an avalanche so fast? Because the rocks and the snow have to move down for thousands of feet, and they can reach maximum speeds. That's what an avalanche is. It's a special type of rockfall, the fastest type of mass wasting. Now let's take a look at the next type of. So there'll be photographs on the test. So you have to know which is which. What does an avalanche look like? What does a rock fall look like? Next one we're going to talk about is a rock slide. We also get rock slides. Let me get a diagram. It'll show it to you better. Be careful when you Google, because that's not a rock slide here. This is a rock slide here. Okay, so notice that here you have sedimentary rocks dipping in the same direction as the slope. That's already a bad sign. Well, what happens when it rains? Do you think that these rocks might slide down these bedding planes? Yes, the rocks slide down a surface. That's different than a rock fall where the rocks fall straight down. It's not as fast. Rock slides are not as fast. They slide down, and they're slowed down by the slope itself. Here's another rock slide. You can see here's a bed here. Here's a limestone bed. Here's a shale bed here, and this bedding plane is lubricated by a heavy rainfall, and some chunks of this rock just slide down. That's called a rock slide. Next one, the next fastest. So we're going from fastest to slowest. Rock falls are the fastest. Rock slides are the second fastest. Of course, avalanches are the fastest rock falls. And the third fastest are the mud flows. We don't get mud flows in Tennessee. I'm sure, but other parts of our country do. Mud flows are caused when huge rivers of mud pour down the sides of slopes, and they can bury everything in their path and just uproot trees. Mud flows are especially common where you have less vegetation, such as desert mountains, but they can also occur if you cut down too many trees. So yeah, there are places, there are a few places in Tennessee that have mud flows. If you in places where people cut down a lot of trees over mud, it could still make a mud flow. It's not as common, but it's very common out west, where these mud flows pour down the sides of these mountains. Um, I just had a good. I was in the army, and my best friend in the army, Arthur Puchowski, came and visited me today, and he and his wife live in Nevada. And if you go to Nevada, you'll see lots of these alluvial fans. These are from mud flows coming down off of these desert mountains. It doesn't rain very much in the desert, but when it does, huge amounts of mud come down. Why? Well, if you're in the desert, there's very little vegetation to hold the soil in. So when it does rain, these mud flows come down the sides of the mountains. To give you an idea, I lived in Nevada in the 90s, and every time it rained, there would be a warning on the radio, on the television, warning people to stay off the roads. If you drive along desert mountains during a rainstorm, you're going to die. And all the native Nevadans know that. But out-of-state people, sometimes they wouldn't pay attention. Doesn't matter if you're driving a tractor trailer. You're going to get buried by that mud. Any size vehicle will get destroyed. So when you're out west, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, make sure you stay off the roads when there's a big rainstorm coming in. Mud flows. Next one we're going to talk about is an earth flow. The earth flows. So the fastest is an avalanche, then ordinary rock falls, then rock slides, then mud flows, and the next fastest is an earth flow. Okay, this is what an earth flow looks like. It has a curved surface like this, and the soil moves down just not really fast, maybe a couple inches every hour, and moves on this curved slip surface, and it makes a scar. It leaves a scar where there's no vegetation, and that's where the earth flow begins. And then there's a toe that forms where the earth collects. This is called an earth flow. Earth flows are common in Tennessee. When you are buying real estate, make sure that you take a look at the property that you want to buy on or you want to build on after it rains. Because if you do, you can pick out these earth flows. Have you ever seen something that looks like this after it rains on a hillside? That's earth flow. That's going to destabilize the slope and make it steeper and give you problems for this house up here. So earth flows are something that real estate investors are real careful about. Here you can see another one. See that? There are ways you can protect yourself when you're buying real estate. There's another. You ever see anything like that? Here you can see the top of the earth flow where the scar is, and then here you can see the toe right here. I'm sure you've seen stuff like this. You probably haven't paid attention to it, but people spend so much time trying to save money on little things like $5, $20 or $1,000 or on a computer or whatever. But when you buy a house, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. Isn't it worth doing some research on that? Look at for evidence of mass wasting. It's going to save you money. Geologists here in East Tennessee will charge you about $75 an hour to look over a property. I know because I've done a lot of these. And what you want to do is hire a geologist, or now that you've taken this class, um, look for these things before you buy your real estate. Another thing that is a big problem here in Tennessee is sinkholes. This is a type of mass wasting that occurs. And I'm sure you've seen these before. They just a hole opens up in the ground. Why? Here, it happens because they built on limestone, and when you have limestone underneath your property, it's going to dissolve. Just like when you dropped acid on limestone, it fizzed because it had calcite in it. Well, rainwater is slightly acidic, so that makes lots of caves. That's what we call karst topography. We have lots of caves. Now, let's say you have a cave and you build on top of that cave. Do you think it might sink in? Sure it would. Sure it can. Let's take a look and see how it happens. It happens all the time in Tennessee. It happens wherever you have warm, wet weather and limestone. It's going to make karst topography, K-A-R-S-T, where you have sinkholes and caves. You can see all kinds of. See, this car just fell into a sinkhole. This vehicle just barely. I mean, they were so lucky here, but you can see that sinkholes can open up. If you're from Oak Ridge, think about what happened to Mona Lane, M-O-N-A Lane. It's not there anymore. But ask the old timers who were here in the 90s or the 80s. Mona Lane was a big road with dozens of houses on it. It completely fell into a sinkhole here in Oak Ridge. I used to take my students there. They build. When you buy a property, make sure you know what kind of rocks are underneath your house. If it's limestone, you're going to have problems with your foundation, your basement. You're going to have cracks in your wall. In fact, it's happened. I get hired to do this. For example, to do back when I first came here to Roan State, we geologists, we don't just teach these classes. We make money on the side. We do consulting work, and it usually pays about anywhere from $75 to $150 an hour. So it sometimes pays more than my salary here. And we have to make connections with people like everybody else, get along with different geologists and drink beer with them and have lunch with them, and everybody gets to know each other until they trust each other. Anyway, I happened to, when I first came to Tennessee, I made friends with a guy from England, John Biggerstaff. I tend to get along well with English geologists because I like their humor, and I appreciate their humor. And I like drinking beer, and I like talking about geology. So I went to, I made friends with this guy, John Biggerstaff, and he was a professor at UT. And my first job, he called me on the telephone and said, "Hello, Arthur. This is John. I'm working here in Johnson City, and the high school seems to be sinking into the ground. I know about the biology part and the microbes that are seeping through the cracks in the building. Now I can identify them, and they're causing the employees to be sick. That part of it I know, but I don't know the geology part of it." So I said to him, "Well, John, I just moved here to Tennessee, and I don't have tenure. I just got started here. I want to spend you're a good friend of mine, and I enjoy hanging out with you. But I've got so many things going on. As a new professor, I have to set up a program, design my classes, order a new lab materials, and I just bought a house, and I got to move all my stuff in, and I just don't have any time, John. I'm sorry." So he said, About $400 an hour then. I said, John, I'm your buddy. I'm your friend. Would I let you down? Of course I'll help you. I'll be right over. Anyway, so I used underground radar to find out that there was a cave underneath the Johnson City High School, and we made the recommendation that they move the high school. That building was shot, and the only way to fill in that cave underneath the Johnson City High School would be to pump concrete into it, which would cost a fortune. So, plus the building was already damaged. Anyway, so we've talked about earth flows, which are very common in Tennessee. We haven't talked about the number one the type of mass wasting that causes more damage to real estate than all other forms of mass wasting combined. And that's called soil creep or creep. Okay, now soil creep moves really slow. Oh gosh, so here's a
soil creep. Soil creep is the movement of soil down a slope under the influence of gravity. As the soil moves downslope, a series of steps can form, giving the surface a rippled appearance. Trees grow at an angle, with the base of the tree turning downslope. Fences and telegraph poles bend or tilt downhill.
So, soil creep occurs everywhere, no matter how gentle the slope is. And soil creep can causes more damage to real estate than all other forms of mass wasting combined. Oh, good Lord.
Mass movement is the movement of surface material downhill due to...
Okay, so soil creep will cause your driveway to crack. It will cause your basement to have cracks in it. There'll be cracks in the walls. The old building there in Oak Ridge already has cracks in the wall from soil creep. So, if you're buying real estate, you must know about soil creep. First thing you do when you buy a house, don't just look at, oh, it's got granite countertops and it's got a big bedrooms and it's got a nice floor and look at the in the crawl space in the basement. Look at the walls. Look at the structure of the building. Look for any evidence of any cracks, cracks in the driveway. Look for if you've got brick paving in front of the houses and the bricks are no longer lining up, the soil's moving. Let me show you how you can do it here. Okay. Oh, before I show you how you do it, I want to draw you a picture to show you how soil creep occurs. I'm sorry, I should have done that first. Okay. So let's say you have a slope. And you've got, always on the top of your slope, you have soil above the rocks. Right? So this is your soil. Soil is in large part consists of clay. Clay expands when it rains, and when it gets dry, it shrinks. Let's put an imaginary pebble right here. When it rains, the soil will expand, pushing this pebble up. Then, when it becomes dry, gravity will pull it down. So over time, this pebble is going to move down slope. Soil moves slowly. No human being has ever seen soil creep, but we can see because it's so slow. But if you set up a time-lapse camera, you can see the soil actually move very slowly. Okay, this is something. I'm going to show you some tricks in the real estate trade. How to buy property on slopes. My house is on top of a slope, and I like, a lot of people like being on top of hills or mountains because there's advantages. You have a great view. You have less chance of flooding. Your flood insurance is going to be cheaper. But you have to be aware of possible soil creep before you buy the property. Okay, so let's take a look at some common things that people can usually look at. Let's see. Let's see if I can get, here's a good picture here. Okay. First thing that I always look at is trees. Okay, trees are the best because look at this tree here. The soil has moved so much that the tree has responded by curving outward. So, oh, good Lord. So the more curved the tree trunk is, the more soil creep is occurring. If you see curved tree trunks, you're going to have a mass wasting problem. So before I buy a house on a hillside, I look for trees coming straight out of the ground. If they're coming straight out of the ground, you're not having any appreciable soil creep. Okay, that's the first thing you can use. Second thing you use is fence posts. Notice how these fence posts are leaning down slope? The soil has caused that. So you can use fence posts. See how there's soil creep. See how this fence is leaning down slope, or these poles are not going straight out of the ground. When they put this fence up, they weren't drunk. They put these they put the wood straight into the ground. Now it's leaning. That's some evidence of soil creep. Another thing you can use is telephone poles for landlines. If the telephone poles are not pointing straight out of the ground and they're leaning, or if the wires are sagging, that means the telephone poles are leaning down slope. That's evidence of soil creep. Another thing you can do to identify soil creep is to look at the sedimentary rocks underneath your property. If the bedding is curved towards the downslope direction, like this, and you can see this from the side of a road, or you use a shovel and see if the rocks are starting to bend downslope, that is evidence of soil creep. It's kind of morbid, but you can also use tombstones. If there's a graveyard nearby and there's soil creep, then the tombstones are going to be falling down or leaning towards the direction of the soil creep. So you can use tombstones as well. If the tombstones are going straight into the ground, that means you don't have any soil creep. So when you buy a house, and look for places, look for evidence that there's not too much soil creep occurring, and look at the house itself so that you'll have less problems. However, if you find that you really like that house and there's soil creep there, you can take pictures on your cell phone of the soil creep and use it to lower the price of the property, so that you can do a mitigation. What is a mitigation? Mitigation is to use engineering methods to stop the soil creep, and it's going to cost you money. For example, I'm going to go over this more in the next video, but for example, one of the most common ways of stopping soil creep is to build a retaining wall. And what a retaining wall does, this one wasn't built very good because it started to break here. But if you build a nice strong retaining wall on the edge of a slope, then that could stop the soil creep. But it's going to cost you money for that retaining wall, right? So you negotiate the price down so you can afford the retaining wall. We'll talk about different kinds of retaining walls later on, but I'll do one more video for this. I'm going to go eat dinner.